All right, let's dive right into this explainer. When we think about corporate expats, those high-flying professionals sent overseas to manage a branch or kick off a new project, we usually picture eager globetrotters. We imagine them thrilled by the adventure of a new culture, armed with a shiny new expat package. But today, we're looking at research that completely flips that assumption on its head, revealing the hidden and honestly quite common reality of forced relocations. Picture this. You get called into your director's office. You're offered this massive international opportunity, a big promotion maybe, in a brand new country. But reading between the lines, you quickly realize it's an offer you simply cannot refuse. The pressure is absolutely immense. Have you ever been in a position where a so-called opportunity felt way more like an ultimatum? Keep that feeling in your mind because that is exactly what we are dissecting today. Here is our roadmap for today. Introduction, literature review, methodology, findings, specifically looking at compelled versus willing, and finally, conclusions and implications. Let's get to it. Section 1. Introduction. The expatriate assumption. For decades, international HR has leaned on this really convenient idea, what academics call a unitarist assumption. Basically, it's the assumption that the organization's interest in sending someone abroad lines up perfectly with the employee's desire to travel and advance their career. But this pivotal paper we're examining today, published in the International Journal of Human Resource Management, puts that idea under intense scrutiny. The researchers ask a highly critical question. What actually happens when the employee doesn't really want to go? Moving on to Section 2, Literature Review, Motives and Outcomes. So how do researchers usually look at why people pack up and move overseas? Traditionally, it boils down to push versus pull factors. Pull factors are the shiny things drawing you in: career development, learning new skills, the thrill of a new culture. Push factors, on the other hand, are what you might be running from. Maybe there's a lack of upward mobility at your home office, or you're just stuck in a rut. People are constantly weighing these two forces. Then there's another layer to this framework: intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic means you're genuinely excited about the international experience for its own sake. Extrinsic, well, you're doing it for the payout. Actually, scratch that. It's not just the salary bump, it's things like a guaranteed promotion when you get back. This tension between what you personally desire and the instrumental rewards the company dangles in front of you really begs the question: who's actually setting the agenda in these corporate negotiations? Section 3. Methodology. The study parameters. So, to really test these ideas, researchers sat down for in-depth, semi-structured interviews with exactly 30 individuals. Now, I know that sounds like a small, qualitative sample, but it allowed them to capture these profound, highly nuanced insights that a simple checkbox survey would completely miss. Just to ground us in the data, the makeup here is solid. We're looking at an even split: 15 expats currently living abroad and 15 repatriates who had recently come back home. They were all Portuguese nationals, aged 28 to 57, scattered across 10 different destination countries, from Brazil to Germany to Angola. And they weren't just popping over for a quick business trip. They were there for an average of over 3 years. Section 4. Findings. Compelled versus willing. This is where things get really fascinating. The primary finding essentially split these 30 professionals into two totally different camps based on their true motivations. Sure, personal and professional challenge and career prospects were the top motives cited, but look closely at the third row. Exactly half of the interviewees, 15 out of 30, straight up admitted that they were essentially compelled or pressured by their employers to accept the relocation. It wasn't a choice. It was a mandate disguised as an offer. The qualitative interviews actually bring this to life in a way numbers just can't. Listen to this from an expat sent to Angola. Either I accepted it or I turned it down and then became part of the problem myself. That is, I would become the problem instead of being the solution. That perfectly highlights the subtle yet intense instrumental pressure organizations exert. The company has a problem abroad, you are the key to solving it, and if you say no, suddenly you're the roadblock. The big takeaway here is that for these compelled employees, their resistance crumbles not out of some sudden burst of corporate loyalty, but out of fear. Plain and simple. As this expat to Brazil noted, turning it down meant risking their entire future. They were terrified of permanently damaging their internal reputation and never being the first choice again. They took the safe option to protect their careers, but at a huge personal cost. And you can guess what happens next, right? That personal cost shows up the second they step off the plane. The adjustment process reveals a stark night and day contrast. The Compelled group experienced severe initial shock. Because they were forced into it, they faced massive cognitive dissonance, which just absolutely tanked their ability to adapt. None of them felt fully adjusted, even after a year. Meanwhile, the willing group, they described the transition as a honeymoon. They expected challenges and just dove straight in to overcome them.
To put a human face on this, think about the isolating reality for someone who never actually wanted to leave home. One compelled expat said, "It was a bit of a shock. The first 5 months are pretty bad. I was in a house which didn't even have a TV." Look, when you don't want to be somewhere, every minor inconvenience feels like a monumental hardship.
All of this filters straight into their day-to-day satisfaction. Because they lack that initial spark, the Compelled group looks at their new home through a hypercritical lens. They heavily criticize their host countries, complaining about the climate, poverty, safety, really just focusing on professional survival so they could grab that promised promotion and get out. The willing group, on the other hand, genuinely loved their new cities. Their only real complaints were standard administrative headaches at the office.
Which brings us to the nightmare scenario for employers, early withdrawal. Look at how highly likely the compelled workers are to point to personal, family, or safety issues as reasons to bail early. Why? Because it serves as a socially acceptable excuse to save face and escape an assignment they never wanted in the first place. Willing workers are a totally different story. They're highly committed and would only leave if they felt they were failing professionally. Section 5. Conclusions and Implications.
So what does this mean for organizations? The strategic takeaways are massive. Backing your top talent into a corner might fill that empty desk overseas today, but it completely undermines the long-term value, the adjustment, and the knowledge transfer of the assignment. HR departments seriously need to replace this paternalistic offer-you-can't-refuse mentality with genuine cooperative negotiation. If an employee is reluctant, organizations have to consider alternative mobility, things like virtual teams or short-term commuting, instead of forcing a square peg into a round hole. This research by Pinto and her colleagues is a huge reality check for global staffing. I absolutely recommend checking out their full paper for a deeper dive into these fascinating interviews. But to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If your company handed you an offer you couldn't refuse tomorrow, would you be willing to sacrifice your personal autonomy for your professional survival? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the assumptions around you.